Most people believe thinking is an active process, that they are the ones generating thoughts, controlling them, shaping them. But what if I told you that thinking is not something you do, it's something that happens? That your mind is not the speaker, but the receiver. You don't create thoughts, you hear them. Like waves rolling onto the shore, thoughts arise spontaneously, appearing in your awareness without your permission. But here's the secret. The real you is not the one making the noise. You are the one listening. This changes everything. Because if you are the listener, not the thinker, then who are you really? You are the silent awareness behind the thoughts, the space in which they appear. And once you realize this, a shift happens. You no longer get lost in every passing thought, no longer take them so seriously. Instead, you can watch them come and go, just as you watch clouds drift across the sky. But society never teaches you this. Instead, it conditions you to identify with every thought that arises, to believe that each passing worry, fear, or desire is you. And that's why so many people are trapped, because they mistake the voice in their head for their true self. So the next time you find yourself caught in overthinking, stop for a moment. Listen, not to the thoughts themselves, but to the silence between them. That silence, that stillness, is you. And the more you rest in that space, the more you will see that you were never your thoughts to begin with. The great mystery is not what you think, it's what remains when you stop mistaking thinking for truth. Thinking is often perceived as a deliberate and controlled process, something we actively do to solve problems, plan for the future, or make sense of the world. From a young age, we are taught that our thoughts belong to us, that we generate them with intention, and that they define who we are. However, if we pay close attention to the nature of thinking itself, a striking realization emerges. Thoughts arise spontaneously, without our conscious effort. They appear and disappear like waves in the ocean, coming into awareness without any deliberate act of creation. This challenges the conventional idea that we are the originators of our thoughts, and instead suggests that thinking is more of an automatic process happening within us rather than something we consciously control. Consider this: at any given moment, thoughts pop into your head without warning. You don't sit down and manually summon them, they simply emerge. You might suddenly remember a conversation from years ago. An old song lyric might start playing in your mind, or a random worry about the future might creep in. These thoughts arise without your permission, without any conscious decision to think them. If you were truly in control of your thinking, you would be able to decide what thought comes next with absolute certainty. Yet, no matter how hard you try, you cannot predict the exact next thought that will enter your mind. This is proof that thinking is not something you actively do, but something that happens to you. This realization becomes even clearer when we look at moments of deep introspection or meditation. When you try to quiet your mind, you quickly realize that thoughts continue to come, uninvited and unprompted. If you were the one controlling them, you could simply stop them at will. But no matter how much you try to force stillness, thoughts continue to rise and fall, proving that they are not products of conscious effort, but rather occurrences that unfold naturally. This is why meditation emphasizes the practice of observing thoughts rather than engaging with them. Thinking is a process that happens on its own, much like breathing or the beating of the heart. Dreaming is another example that highlights the spontaneous nature of thinking. When you sleep, your mind generates entire worlds, vivid experiences, and complex narratives without any conscious effort on your part. You don't sit down before sleeping and decide what dream to have. It simply unfolds by itself. And yet when you wake up, you believe that your waking thoughts are somehow different, that you are the one actively creating them. But in truth, the same mechanism is at play in both states. Whether awake or asleep, thoughts appear without your control. The only difference is that in wakefulness, you believe you are the one doing the thinking, whereas in dreams, you recognize it as an involuntary process. Another way to understand this is by observing how thoughts often contradict each other. One moment you might feel excited about a new opportunity, and the next, a fearful thought might arise, making you doubt yourself. If you were the true master of your thoughts, why would you create contradictory ideas that battle within your mind? It's because thoughts are not generated by some unified self, but rather emerge from a deeper, unconscious process. They rise and fall like ripples on the surface of a vast ocean, sometimes appearing harmonious and sometimes chaotic. This also explains why inspiration often strikes when you least expect it. When your mind is relaxed and open, thoughts flow naturally, without force or effort. This understanding challenges the way we relate to our thoughts. If thinking is something that happens to us rather than something we do, then it means we are not bound to every thought that arises. We don't have to believe or act upon every idea that enters our mind. This is a liberating realization because it means we have the ability to step back and observe our thoughts without identifying with them. Instead of being caught in the endless stream of mental chatter, we can recognize that our true nature is the awareness that perceives these thoughts, not the thoughts themselves. This shift in perspective can lead to profound inner peace. Many people suffer from anxiety and stress because they believe every thought that arises must be taken seriously. But if thoughts are simply occurrences that come and go, like waves in the ocean, then there is no need to cling to them or be disturbed by them. The more we observe this process, the more we understand that our thoughts do not define us. They are just mental events, passing through awareness like clouds drifting across the sky. Understanding that thinking happens on its own also helps dissolve the illusion of control. People often struggle with overthinking, believing they must force their minds to generate solutions or constantly analyze situations to gain clarity. But some of the best insights and realizations come when we stop trying so hard to think. Creativity, problem-solving, and deep understanding often arise in moments of stillness, when we allow thoughts to flow naturally rather than trying to force them. How do we actually stop thinking? When we allow thoughts to flow naturally rather than trying to force them, this realization can transform the way we experience life. Instead of being consumed by our thoughts, we can take a step back and witness them. Instead of trying to control or suppress thinking, we can allow it to unfold naturally. And in doing so, we discover a deeper awareness beyond the stream of thoughts. It's in understanding that a person can experience. Most people go through life believing that the voice in their head, the constant stream of thoughts, judgments, and inner dialogue, is who they are. But if you pause for a moment and observe, you will see that thoughts come and go on their own, while something remains constant. The awareness that perceives them. This awareness is your true self. Imagine sitting in a quiet room and suddenly a sound appears. A distant conversation, the hum of an air conditioner, the chirping of birds outside. You hear these sounds, but you are not the sounds themselves. They arise in your field of perception, you notice them, and then they fade away. Thoughts operate in the same way. They arise, you become aware of them, and then they disappear. If you were truly the one thinking, then you should be able to control the flow of your thoughts entirely. But just as you cannot prevent an unexpected sound from reaching your ears, you cannot stop a thought from appearing in your mind. This is because thoughts are not yours in the way most people assume. They are simply occurrences that arise within awareness. This realization can be unsettling at first because it contradicts everything we have been taught. From childhood, we are conditioned to believe that our thoughts define us. We introduce ourselves with labels based on our beliefs, opinions, and internal narratives, as if they are fixed and personal. But upon deeper examination, it becomes clear that thoughts are more like passing clouds in the sky, temporary, ever-changing, and beyond our conscious control. You are not the clouds, you are the sky itself, the space in which they appear. This distinction becomes even more evident when we examine how thoughts behave. If you pay attention, you will notice that thoughts arise without warning, shift unpredictably, and often contradict each other. One moment you feel inspired, the next moment doubtful. One day you believe you are capable of achieving great things, the next day your mind tells you otherwise. If you were truly in control, why would you allow such contradictions to exist within you? The truth is, you are not the one creating these thoughts. You are the one hearing them. Recognizing that you are the listener rather than the thinker allows you to take a step back and observe thoughts rather than becoming entangled in them. Imagine sitting by a river and watching the water flow past. Some parts of the river may be calm, others turbulent, but no matter how the current moves, you remain on the riverbank, simply watching. The same applies to thoughts. They can be positive, negative, insightful, or irrational. But they are not you. They simply pass through your awareness, like the water flows in a river. This shift in understanding has immense practical benefits. Many people suffer from anxiety, stress, and overthinking because they identify too closely with every thought that arises. If a fearful thought appears, they immediately assume it is true and react accordingly. But when you realize that thoughts are just mental events independent of who you are, you can let them come and go without being controlled by them. A thought only has power over you if you believe it to be real. The moment you recognize it as just another passing event in consciousness, it loses its grip. Consider the experience of being lost in thought. When you are deeply absorbed in worries about the future or regrets about the past, it feels as though you are trapped in your mind, unable to escape the cycle of thinking. But the moment you become aware that you are thinking, when you suddenly notice, oh, I'm caught in thought, something shifts, the spell is broken. That awareness of thought is what sets you free. You are not lost anymore because you have stepped into the position of the observer. You have remembered that you are the listener, not the thoughts themselves. From childhood, society conditions us to believe that our thoughts define who we are. We are taught to identify with the voice in our head, to believe that every thought we have is meaningful and that it represents our true self. This conditioning begins early. Parents, teachers, and authority figures constantly reinforce the idea that we must control our minds, think the right thoughts, and avoid the wrong ones. We are encouraged to analyze, label, and judge every mental experience, turning our inner world into a battlefield of competing ideas beliefs, and expectations. As we grow, this conditioning becomes stronger. We begin to associate our identity with the thoughts we have about ourselves. If a person frequently has thoughts of doubt, they assume they are a doubtful person. If they have thoughts of fear, they believe they are fearful. If they experience moments of anger or jealousy, they assume those emotions define their character. This identification with thought creates a rigid sense of self, one that is constantly shaped by whatever arises in the mind. But the truth is, thoughts are simply mental events, temporary, fleeting, and beyond our control. They do not define us, yet society never teaches us this. Instead, it reinforces the illusion that we are our thoughts. This conditioning also leads to suffering because it traps people in cycles of unnecessary mental struggle. When a negative thought arises, instead of letting it pass, people analyze it, judge it, and sometimes even feel ashamed for having it. If someone suddenly thinks, "I'm not good enough," they don't simply notice the thought and let it go. Instead, they begin to argue with it, trying to prove it wrong. Or worse, they believe it and allow it to dictate their emotions and actions. But this entire process is unnecessary. Thoughts come and go on their own, and they only have power when we attach meaning to them. If we were never taught to identify with them in the first place, they would simply pass like clouds drifting through the sky. One of the most damaging aspects of societal conditioning is the belief that some thoughts are inherently bad and should never arise. People are made to feel guilty or ashamed for certain thoughts, even though they have no control over what appears in their minds. This creates a cycle of repression, where instead of observing thoughts with detachment, people try to suppress or fight against them. But fighting thoughts only strengthens them. The more resistance we apply, the more persistent they become. This is why individuals who try to force themselves to think positively often struggle. The more they push against negative thoughts, the stronger those thoughts become. Another way society reinforces identification with thoughts is through labels. From an early age, we are given labels based on our intelligence, personality, and emotions. If a child struggles with math, they might be labeled as not good at numbers, and they carry that belief into adulthood. If someone is naturally introverted, they might be labeled as shy, which can make them feel like they must always act a certain way. These labels become mental stories that shape how people see themselves, even though they are just constructs. In reality, no single thought or belief can define a person, yet society convinces us otherwise. The media and social expectations further deepen this illusion. People are constantly bombarded with messages about how they should think, what they should believe, and how they should define themselves. Advertisements, social media, and cultural narratives all create mental patterns that shape how individuals perceive themselves and the world. When people internalize these patterns, they become trapped in a mental framework that dictates their actions and emotions without them even realizing it. They begin to mistake societal programming for their authentic self. Breaking free from this conditioning requires a shift in awareness. Instead of automatically believing every thought, one must learn to step back and observe. When a thought arises, rather than asking, "Is this thought true?" one can ask, "Who is aware of this thought?" This simple shift allows a person to see that thoughts appear and disappear within awareness, but the awareness itself remains unchanged. The key is to recognize that thoughts do not need to be controlled, changed, or fought against. They can simply be observed, just like sounds, sights, and sensations. Once this realization takes hold, the grip of societal conditioning weakens. Thoughts that once seemed overwhelming lose their power. Doubts, fears, and worries no longer feel like personal failures, but are instead seen as passing mental activity. The need to constantly define oneself through thought diminishes, and a deeper sense of presence emerges. Life becomes less about analyzing every mental experience and more about simply being. This understanding brings immense freedom. Instead of being trapped in an identity built on mental narratives, one becomes open to the fluid nature of experience. The mind may continue to generate thoughts, but they are no longer mistaken for absolute truth. Instead, they are seen for what they truly are: temporary, ever-changing, and ultimately separate from the deeper awareness that observes them. Most people go through life believing that every thought they have is important, meaningful, and worth engaging with. They assume that if a thought arises, it must be analyzed, acted upon, or taken seriously. This is why overthinking becomes such a common struggle, because people feel as though they are responsible for every single idea, worry, or doubt that appears in their minds. But in reality, thoughts are just passing occurrences, much like clouds in the sky. Some are bright and pleasant, others are dark and stormy, but none of them are permanent. They come and go on their own, and just because a thought appears doesn't mean it holds any real truth or power. The ability to step back and observe thoughts rather than automatically believing them is one of the most liberating shifts a person can experience. Imagine sitting by a river and watching the water flow. You don't try to stop the river, control its direction, or grab onto any specific ripple. You simply observe as it moves past. The same approach can be applied to thinking. When a thought appears, instead of immediately reacting, you can just notice it, acknowledge that it is there, and let it pass. The moment you do this, you realize that you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that sees them. This understanding is particularly powerful when it comes to negative or intrusive thoughts. Many people assume that if they have a certain thought, it must mean something about them. If a doubt appears, they believe they must be uncertain. If an anxious thought arises, they assume they must be in danger. But just because a thought exists doesn't mean it reflects reality. The mind generates all kinds of thoughts, some useful, some random, some completely irrational. A person can have a fearful thought even when nothing is wrong, just as they can have a thought about flying without suddenly growing wings. The presence of a thought does not mean it is true, and realizing this takes away its power. Society conditions people to take their thoughts seriously, which is why so many struggle with overthinking and mental distress. From a young age, people are taught to think things through, to analyze every decision, and to avoid making mistakes. While rational thinking has its place, many thoughts arise not from logic, but from habit, fear, or subconscious programming. The mind is constantly generating stories, many of which are exaggerated or completely unnecessary. When people believe these stories without question, they become trapped in cycles of doubt, anxiety, and worry. But when they learn to observe thoughts with detachment, they begin to see that much of their mental chatter is irrelevant noise. One way to break free from the habit of taking thoughts too seriously is to recognize their impermanence. No thought stays forever. Even the most intense worries eventually fade, replaced by new thoughts, new experiences, and new perspectives. If a thought is temporary, then why give it so much importance? The mind may say, "What if everything goes wrong in one moment, and an hour later it may say, everything is fine. If thoughts constantly contradict each other, why believe any of them as absolute truth? The more a person observes their mind without attachment, the more they see that thoughts are just fluctuations of energy, not defining truths about reality. This doesn't mean that all thoughts should be ignored. Some thoughts are useful and practical, helping with problem solving and decision making. But even these thoughts do not require attachment. A person can think critically without becoming lost in their mental world. They can use thoughts as tools rather than becoming controlled by them. The key is to see thoughts as suggestions rather than commands. When a thought appears, instead of automatically believing it, one can ask, is this useful? Does this serve me? If the answer is no, then the thought can simply be let go, just as easily as it arrived. Meditation and mindfulness practices emphasize this approach, teaching people to witness thoughts without getting caught in them. In meditation, thoughts are observed like passing clouds, appearing and disappearing within the vast sky of awareness. Some clouds are big, some small, some light, some heavy, but none of them define the sky itself. The same is true for thoughts. No matter how many thoughts appear, awareness remains untouched. The freedom that comes from detaching from thoughts cannot be overstated. Once a person realizes they don't have to take every thought seriously, they experience a profound sense of inner peace. Worries lose their grip, fears become less overwhelming, and the mind's endless chatter becomes background noise rather than a constant source of stress. Instead of feeling trapped in thought, one feels spacious, open, and free. By stepping back and observing thoughts rather than reacting to them, a person gains clarity and control over their inner world. Instead of being pulled in every direction by fleeting ideas, they rest in the deeper awareness that exists beyond thinking. This shift transforms the way life is experienced, making room for greater presence, peace, and a deeper connection to the present moment. The moment you realize that thoughts are not something you control, but rather something you observe, everything begins to change. Most people spend their lives trapped in an endless loop of thinking, believing that their thoughts must be engaged with, analyzed, and even fought against. But what if thoughts are not meant to be controlled at all? What if they are simply occurrences, like the sound of the wind, the chirping of birds, or the passing of clouds? When you stop trying to manage every thought, and instead allow them to come and go as they please, you step into a state of profound freedom. Consider how the mind works on its own. Thoughts arise spontaneously, without effort. You do not sit down and deliberately create every thought you have. They appear by themselves. One moment you may be thinking about your plans for the day, and in the next your mind has jumped to a childhood memory or a random song lyric. If you were truly in control of your thoughts, you would be able to decide exactly what to think at every moment, but that is not how it works. Thoughts emerge, shift, and fade without your conscious input. Recognizing this fact is the first step toward freedom. Most people react to their thoughts as if they are urgent messages requiring immediate attention. If a thought of worry arises, they assume they must find a solution immediately. If a thought of self-doubt appears, they assume it must be true. This constant engagement with thoughts creates unnecessary stress and suffering. But once you recognize that thoughts are just passing events in awareness, You can stop reacting to them automatically. A fearful thought can arise, and instead of believing it, you can simply notice it, just as you would notice the sound of a passing car. It is there, but it does not need to affect you. One of the biggest misconceptions people have is that they must get rid of negative thoughts to find peace. This belief leads to frustration because the more you try to push thoughts away, the stronger they become. If someone tells you not to think about a pink elephant, your mind immediately conjures the image of a pink elephant. The same happens with unwanted thoughts. The effort to suppress them only reinforces their presence. True peace does not come from eliminating thoughts, but from allowing them to exist without attachment. Imagine watching a storm from the safety of your home. The wind howls, the rain pours, and thunder crashes, but you remain inside, untouched by the storm. Your thoughts are like that storm. They can be chaotic, intense, and unpredictable, but you do not have to be caught in them. You can simply watch, knowing that the storm will pass, just as all thoughts eventually do. This shift in perspective changes everything. Instead of being dragged around by your mind, you become a witness to it. Many spiritual traditions emphasize this practice of witnessing thoughts without identification. Meditation, mindfulness, and self-inquiry all point toward the same truth, that you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness in which thoughts arise. This is why meditation does not aim to stop thinking, but to observe thinking. The goal is not to control the mind, but to see it clearly, without getting lost in it. The more you practice this, the more spacious and peaceful your inner world becomes. Over time, as you cultivate this awareness, you will notice that thoughts lose their grip on you. A thought that once triggered anxiety or self-doubt now appears as just another passing moment, no different from the sound of a bird or a passing breeze. This does not mean thoughts disappear entirely. They will continue to arise as long as you are alive, but they will no longer control you. They will come and go, and you will remain untouched, like the vast sky that remains unaffected by the clouds that pass through it. This understanding leads to a deep sense of inner freedom. When you no longer feel the need to control your thoughts, you stop struggling with them. You stop analyzing every mental event as if it holds the key to your happiness. Instead, you rest in the awareness that is always present beneath the thinking mind. And in that space, you discover a peace that is not dependent on what thoughts arise or disappear. It is a peace that has always been there, hidden beneath the noise of the mind. The realization that you do not have to control your thoughts, that you can simply observe them without attachment, is one of the most freeing insights a person can have. It allows you to step out of the endless cycle of overthinking, worry, and self-doubt. It brings a clarity that cannot be found by trying to fix or change the mind, but only by seeing it for what it truly is. A passing phenomenon in the vast space of awareness, and in that realization you find true liberation. The present moment is all there is. Yet most people spend their lives lost in thoughts of the past or the future, rarely fully experiencing the now. The mind constantly replays old memories, regrets, or mistakes, as if revisiting them will somehow change what has already happened. At the same time, it projects into the future, worrying about what might go wrong, what needs to be done, or how things will unfold. This endless cycle of mental time travel creates stress, anxiety, and dissatisfaction because it pulls people away from the only reality that actually exists, the present moment. When you become aware of this pattern, you start to see how much time is wasted in unnecessary mental noise. The past is gone and cannot be changed. The future is not yet here and is always uncertain, yet the mind clings to both. believing that thinking about them will somehow provide security or control. But in reality, all it does is create suffering. The past can never be altered by thought, and the future can never be fully predicted. The more you try to control what is beyond your reach, the more you feel trapped by your own mind. Freedom comes the moment you recognize that life is happening now, not in some distant memory or imagined future. Everything you have ever experienced has only ever happened in the present moment. Even when you remember the past, you are doing it now. Even when you plan for the future, you are doing it now. The present is the only space where life truly unfolds, and the more you immerse yourself in it, the more alive you feel. Think about the times when you have felt the most peaceful, joyful, or content. Those moments were likely times when you were fully present, when you were not caught up in thought, but completely engaged with life as it was happening. It could be watching a sunset, listening to music, laughing with a friend, or simply sitting in silence. In those moments, there was no need to chase happiness, because you were already experiencing it. The problem is that the mind constantly pulls you away from such moments, making you believe that happiness exists somewhere else, somewhere in the past you wish you could relive, or in the future you hope will be better. But in doing so, it blinds you to the joy that is already available right here, right now. The more you practice being present, the more you realize that the mind's endless thinking is unnecessary most of the time. Life does not require constant analysis. You do not need to be thinking all the time to experience reality. In fact, the less you engage with thoughts, the more clearly you see and feel the world around you. When the mind quiets, the simplest things become extraordinary. The sound of the wind, the sensation of breathing, the warmth of the sun. These everyday experiences hold a depth that is often overlooked because the mind is too busy focusing elsewhere. People often believe that they need to achieve something or change their circumstances before they can find peace. But the truth is that peace is already here. It is only the constant mental commentary that creates the illusion that something is missing. When you stop identifying with every passing thought and instead rest in awareness, you see that nothing is lacking. There is nothing to chase, because everything you truly seek, peace, contentment, and fulfillment, is found in the simple experience of being present. This is why many spiritual teachings emphasize mindfulness, meditation, and awareness. These practices are not about adding anything new to your experience. They are about stripping away the unnecessary distractions that keep you from seeing what has always been there. When you sit in silence and simply observe your surroundings without labeling, judging, or analyzing, you tap into a state of presence that is deeply fulfilling. There is no need to force it or manufacture it. It is already there, beneath the noise of the mind. Over time, as you cultivate this awareness, life becomes lighter. Situations that once seemed overwhelming lose their intensity. Worries about the future no longer dominate your thoughts because you see that everything is always unfolding in the now. Regrets about the past no longer weigh you down because you recognize that the past has no power over the present unless you give it power through thought. You begin to trust the flow of life rather than constantly trying to control it. This shift in perception transforms the way you experience everything. You move from living in a state of constant mental distraction to fully engaging with life as it happens. Instead of rushing through experiences, you savor them. Instead of waiting for happiness to arrive in some imagined future, you discover that it has always been available in the present. The realization that you do not need to be anywhere else, do anything else, or become anyone else in order to find peace is the most freeing understanding of all.